NHL Insider drops a bombshell on a massive trade stating Steve Yzerman and the Detroit Red Wings are all in on a young budding star in the league. We're going to talk about what it takes to bring him to Detroit and how he will impact the future of this Red Wings team going forward. So you're not going to want to miss this episode of Hattrick HQ. But before we get into it, we got to say that 89% of you guys watching this video right now aren't subscribed to the channel. So if you want to stay up on the latest NHL news, trade rumors, trade updates, everything surrounding the NHL, including the Four Nations face-off, make sure you're down below and hit that subscribe button. But Darius, with that said, we got a huge report to get into from Kevin Weeks saying that there has been many sources telling him that there has been a lot of interest in Sabres forward Dylan Cozens, including the Montreal Canadiens, the Calgary Flames, the Maple Leafs, but most importantly, the Detroit Red Wings. And if we just take a look at just last month, we heard from Friedman saying Cozens and the Red Wings believe it was close at one point. So it seems like the Red Wings and Yzerman are still in on Dylan Cozens and are still trying to make that trade happen, even almost a month later. We're at the 6th of February right now, so it seems like they've been continuously in talks trying to make Dylan Cozens a Detroit Red Wing. And for good measure here, I mean, he had 53 games this season. He has 26 points, 10 goals, 16 assists. And one thing that I like out of Dylan Cozens this year that a lot of people don't really talk about is how big of an improvement he's had at the faceoff dot, going from 45% to 50% this season. So showing some dramatic improvement here. And if we just take a look at his chart here from daily faceoff, compared this season to his last 3 seasons, it seems like he's more stepped down on the goal scoring side and has moved into that pure playmaker that we've seen from him when he was a young prospect. And he's taking a lot more shots, laying a lot more hits. And Darius, when you look at this Detroit Red Wings team, it seems like he slots perfectly here in the 2C role.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, that's the first thing I was going to get to. The Detroit Red Wings need a second line center. That is kind of something that, is of need for this team. It only makes sense for them. And Andrew Kopp, I mean, he's a great player. He's a great role player. I think he can play in your bottom 6, but in talking about, where they could upgrade, Dylan Cozens is a great update. And, I'm kind of sick and tired of this disrespect to Dylan Cozens over the last 2 days since these reports have been coming out, because is he having a good year? Not in terms of point production. He might end the year with maybe 45 points, 50 points, something like that. And is that, really what he is? I don't think so. Look at the team he's playing on, the Buffalo Sabres, who, again, have no purpose. They're not playing for anything. It looks like they're trying to rebuild again for how many times? The 8th time in the last 12 years or something like that, right? So, I mean, it's just not a good situation for him in Buffalo. And look at his line mates as well, right? He's playing 1C for them right now, which I think on another team, maybe ideally he isn't that. And he's a great second line center, especially for his cap hit and what he brings to the table. But like you said, he's improved in some areas in terms of faceoffs, which is something we've seen around the league is a hot commodity. Sidney Crosby, John Tavares, guys like that, right? When you need a faceoff one in a late game situation, this is a guy who's improving his faceoff stats. He's not scoring as much. That's fine. He's passing the puck. He has nobody to pass to on the Buffalo Sabres. If you slot him in to the Detroit Red Wings, maybe you put Patrick Kane on his line, a pure scorer. That might be a match made in heaven to a degree, of course, but it depends. Maybe even Alex DeBrincat, right? Like maybe they can play around with the line combinations there, but I think it just makes sense to have him at second line center. And I do think he's going to be moved at this year's trade deadline or just ahead of the deadline. There are a ton of teams who are interested. I think the Calgary Flames can give up quite a bit to get him. They might be the front runners at this point. I think the Toronto Maple Leafs are actually making a hard push for this player. I think that they've seen what the market is around the league and they'd rather get a second line center than a third line center. I also think the Montreal Canadiens wouldn't mind another centerman, right? So there's a couple teams in the mix. I think the Red Wings have the assets to spend and the salary cap space to go out and get this guy. We'll get into that later in the video, of course, but I think it just makes sense to have him on the Detroit Red Wings on that second line center spot. And I think that he is a young budding star in this league. He's only about to be 24 in 2 days. And I think that he still has a very high ceiling.
Yeah, and like you just said, the kid's 23, about to be 24. He's still young and entering the prime of his career. So I think getting him out of Buffalo, we see people leave Buffalo, aka Jack Eichel, and go off and win a Stanley Cup. So, I mean, the Buffalo Sabres, like you said, have been unfortunately battling a rebuild for, it seems like, the past 20 years at this point. I mean, it sucks. I hate for the Buffalo fans to go through what they're going through right now, but unfortunately, it's the way it is. And Dylan Cozens, might be the odd man out here to where they have to slip back into a rebuild or try to get an aging player to help these young players' mentality or something out in Buffalo. So I think that's something that Detroit can give up, and I think this would be a massive, perfect trade for the Detroit Red Wings, because I think you get this guy in the 2C playing with DeBrincat and Tarasenko. Tarasenko's a guy who can score some goals. I know he's older, but if you get a pure playmaker like Dylan Cozens in this lineup, the offensive production is only going to go up. And like you mentioned, he just signed a new contract a couple of years ago, $7.1 million AAV. So you're probably wondering, can the Detroit Red Wings afford this? And yes, they can, because their current cap hit right now is about $5.7 million. So, and their current cap at the deadline is about $9 million. So it seems like they could bring this guy in and not have to give up a whole lot to make the cap work here. And yes, he is already on a deal. He's locked up for the next 5 years. So it's a good thing for Steve Yzerman, because he doesn't need to worry about an extension and all this stuff. He's already a player who has a lot of years left. And when I look at this, I think, you know, the Detroit Red Wings have a lot of picks here. I mean, we see in the bottom right there, they have a first for the next 3 years. They have a second for the next 3 years. So they got the picks to make it work. They got some prospects there that they can flip out if that's what Buffalo is looking for. I mean, what can you see Detroit giving up for a guy like Dylan Cozens?
Well, by all reports over the last 2 days from Kevin Weeks and even Elliot Friedman, for some reason, what the Buffalo Sabres want is draft picks. It sounds like a lot of the hang up in terms of trade talks, with some of these teams is the fact that some of them don't have draft capital, like the Toronto Maple Leafs, and the Toronto Maple Leafs also don't have any salary cap space. So that is a problem too. The Detroit Red Wings have both of those things. So for some reason, the Buffalo Sabres want draft picks in return. So it's obviously going to be a first round pick, probably this year's first round pick, which the Red Wings, I think, would be okay with giving up. They're also in the mix for the playoffs at this point. They're right there. Obviously, I don't know what's going to happen in the East. It's a crazy year. Never seen it like this, but they're certainly in the mix. I think they might be okay with giving up their first for a guy like Cozens, who, you know, at the end of the day, Dylan Larkin's getting older as well. You have to consider, you know, who do we have in our second C spot? Can he eventually play 1C, right? So in terms of giving up, I wouldn't be too worried about that. Obviously, I think the Sabres would want somebody who can make an impact right now as well at, you know, forward, not just center. So it could be anybody at this point, just somebody who can make an impact and play in the NHL at the NHL level right away instead of a draft pick, but obviously still with a first attached to that. So it's going to get very interesting. It makes sense for the Red Wings to do it, to give up these assets, because this is a guy who's a big body. Again, he still has a high ceiling to me. I think he can still be a difference maker in this league, especially as the years go on here. And he's only making 7.1. If he does eventually hit his ceiling or reach, you know, any type of, you know, close to what we thought his potential was because he is playing in Buffalo with another team, I think this could be a steal of a contract, especially as the salary cap continues to rise as much as it is over the next couple of years.
Yeah, definitely. I think Yzerman here needs to make a decision. He needs to look at it, look in the mirror and say, what are we doing? Are we going to push for a playoff spot, or are we going to wait another year? But with the talent that they have there, it seems like they're making that push. Obviously, they got Patty Kane, they got Tarasenko, guys that they could move at the deadline if they decide to not push for the playoffs. But I can't see that out of Detroit. Their young guys are developed. They're getting into the prime of their careers. I mean, Raymond's having a fantastic season. Sider's having a fantastic season. So it seems like the only decision here is to push for the playoffs. And how do you do that? Go out, flip your first round pick for a guy like Dylan Cozens, who was a 7th overall draft selection at one point. So you're really giving out a first for a first, and some whatever the sweeteners for the deal are going to be. So the trade only makes sense in my eyes. I don't know how, like they said they were close on it. I'm wondering what was the deciding factor for Buffalo to say no here. It doesn't really make sense to me. I mean, yes, Dylan Cozens is having a down year, but he is definitely worth a first round pick because his future, he has a very high ceiling still, and I think he can get there. I would love this trade for the Detroit Red Wings. I want to hear from you guys down below in the comment section, Red Wings fans. If you're Steve Yzerman right now, what do you do? Do you go out and get Dylan Cozens? Let us know. What do you give up for him? Let us know down below in the comment section. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. We're on the road for 12,000 subscribers before the Four Nations face-off kicks off, so make sure you're down below and hit that subscribe button. But as always, I've been your host, KC, alongside my co-host, Darius. Keep your stick on the ice.